San Antonio, Texas, sits near the Mexican border and is known for how naturally different cultures blend together. For many people with Mexican roots, the city feels familiar and welcoming. Even the name San Antonio comes from Spanish and translates to Saint Anthony. One of the city's well-known landmarks is Trinity University, including its College of Arts and Sciences and the Murchison Tower. Standing 166 feet tall, it was once the tallest building in San Antonio. One night, a young man walked onto the Trinity University campus and made his way to a women's dormitory. He went up to the second floor, found a specific room, and forced his way inside by breaking the door handle. What happened next left the room in disarray. Clothes were thrown across the floor. Furniture was damaged. Books and notebooks were ripped apart and scattered. When campus security arrived, responding to the noise, they found a very different scene than they expected. The young man was sitting on the bed crying. A soda had spilled beside him, and he appeared completely overwhelmed. He was arrested and taken to the police station. The damage to the room and university property was later estimated at $1,650. The man was identified as 22-year-old Mark Howarton. At the time, he was grieving the recent loss of his girlfriend, Kaylee Mandadi. He was struggling to cope, and being in her room seemed to push him past his breaking point. During the arrest, officers described him as inconsolable. He repeatedly called out Kaylee's name. What made the situation even more troubling was that months earlier, Mark Howarton had already been charged in connection with Kaylee Mandadi's death. Kay was a Trinity University cheerleader, and her case would soon become filled with rumors, unanswered questions, and extensive involvement from law enforcement. To understand how everything led to this moment, it's important to go back to the beginning. Kaylee Anita Mandadi was born on August 26, 1998, in Webster, Texas, to Talak Mandadi and Allison Steele. She grew up in a financially stable household. Her mother was a scientist, and her father worked as an international executive director for MGM Resorts. After her parents divorced, Allison remarried Lawrence Butland, a NASA engineer based in Houston when Kay was 9 years old. Despite the divorce, Kay remained close to her father and stayed in regular contact with him. Her stepfather also played an important role in her life and treated her like his own daughter. Kay was known as a loving and thoughtful daughter and granddaughter. She was also a strong student, a dedicated teammate, and a loyal friend. People who knew her often talked about her easy laugh and the way she made others feel comfortable. At school, Kay did well academically and stayed busy outside the classroom. She enjoyed horseback riding, played the piano, and took part in theater productions, balancing her interests with her studies and cheerleading. Kaylee had been a Girl Scout growing up. She spent a lot of time running around her Clear Lake neighborhood with friends, hiking with her parents, theater, and staying active. In 2016, she graduated with honors from Clear Creek High School in League City, Texas. She also loved animals and volunteered with an organization called Animal Therapy, something she took real pride in. Kay was curious and adventurous by nature. She liked the idea of pushing herself, talked about wanting to try extreme sports, and was always looking for new experiences. By 19, the slim, dark-haired Kay was already a sophomore at Trinity University in San Antonio, majoring in communications. She was popular on campus, had a wide circle of friends, and served as the captain of the football team's cheerleading squad. People noticed her easily. It was during a Trinity football game that Kay met 22-year-old Mark Howarton. Mark was tall, athletic, and played professional baseball. At first, Kay barely noticed him. She had feelings for someone else named Jeff, and wasn't paying much attention to anyone new. Mark, on the other hand, was immediately drawn to her. He later talked about her big, dark eyes and the confidence that made her stand out from the rest of the cheer squad. Their first couple of encounters were awkward and didn't go anywhere. But Mark didn't give up. By September of 2017, the two were officially dating. From the outside, friends and classmates thought they were an odd match. Both were emotional. Both had quick tempers, and arguments came easily. There was little compromise in the relationship, and disagreements often turned intense. Jealousy became a constant issue, and the fighting grew more frequent. Friends began noticing bruises on Kayle's arms and legs. One close friend later described a moment that deeply unsettled her. Kay asked her to retrieve her phone from Mark because she was too scared to do it herself. As time went on, Mark's behavior became more aggressive. At one point, he allegedly pulled out a gun and made violent threats. Kay knew Mark could be jealous and volatile, but she often tried to downplay what was happening. She asked friends not to talk about the arguments and admitted that she wasn't completely blameless either. That changed in the early hours of September 24, 2017. Around 1 a.m., Kayle's roommates had reached their limit. They heard loud noises coming from her room and a man yelling threats. Frightened, they called the police. When an officer arrived, Mark was alone in the room. Kay chose not to press charges, telling police that nothing serious had happened and describing it as a lover's argument. Friends also began to suspect that Mark was using drugs, something they believed made his anger harder to control. At one point, he allegedly threatened to throw Kay off a balcony, a claim her friends later reported to police. The relationship swung between extremes. There were moments when things seemed calm and loving, and then periods when everything felt unstable and tense. On October 29th, Mark and Kay went to the Mal Luna Music Festival in San Antonio. The festival is one of the largest music events in the city, drawing crowds of more than 10,000 people. With loud music and packed spaces, it's easy to blend into the crowd, which is part of its appeal. That night, Mark and Kay spent hours at the festival, drinking, partying, and hanging out with friends. But things shifted when Kayle's ex showed up unexpectedly. The sight of him set Mark off. The two got into a heated argument and left the festival early. It was the last time their friends saw them together that night. Roughly 6 hours later, late into the night, Mark pulled up to a hospital in his black Mercedes. He jumped out of the car, waving his arms and yelling for help. Inside the front seat, hospital staff found Kay. She was unconscious, partially undressed, and slumped forward. Her clothes were scattered throughout the car, which was in complete disarray. Kay was rushed inside on a stretcher and taken straight to the emergency room. Mark told hospital staff that they had taken illegal substances before going to the festival. Based on that information, doctors initially treated Kay for a possible overdose. She was later transferred to another medical center in Kyle, Texas. There, a nurse trained in sexual assault cases examined her and noted additional bruising on Kayle's arms, legs, and ear. A forensic exam later revealed that Kay died from blunt force trauma to the face and head. The findings made it clear that her injuries were not accidental. With that, police opened a homicide investigation into Kay Mandadi's death. Mark immediately became the primary suspect. He was the last known person to be with her that night. Even though there was no single piece of evidence that directly tied Mark to the attack, investigators grew increasingly suspicious. During multiple interviews, Mark changed his version of events several times. Surveillance footage placed Mark and Kay at locations he had never mentioned to police. As detectives spoke with Kaylee's friends and family, a troubling pattern began to emerge. They described Mark as controlling and aggressive. One of Kaylee's sisters admitted she was afraid of him. Police also uncovered previous reports of violence between the couple, including an incident where Mark allegedly slammed Kaylee's head against a car window and another where he trashed her dorm room at Trinity University. When Kaylee's parents learned the full extent of what their daughter had been going through, they were devastated. Allison Steele, the mother of Trinity University cheerleader Kay Mandadi, later filed a lawsuit against the university. She accused Trinity of failing to take reasonable steps to protect her daughter from her boyfriend, the same man authorities believe was responsible for Kaylee's death. The lawsuit was filed in Becker County District Court on Allison's behalf and named both Trinity University and Mark Howarton, Kaylee's former boyfriend, as defendants. It alleges that Howarton assaulted the 19-year-old from League City and was ultimately responsible for her death. According to the lawsuit, Trinity's staff, administrators, and campus police were aware of Mark's volatile behavior throughout his relationship with Kay. It claims he made repeated threats to seriously harm her, including saying he would break her face. Despite those warnings, the lawsuit argues that the university failed to take meaningful action in the weeks leading up to Kay's death. A spokesperson for Trinity University declined to comment, citing the ongoing legal proceedings. The lawsuit also claims that Trinity ignored multiple reports involving harassment, intimidation, domestic violence, and gender-based misconduct. Allison Steele has said she believes her daughter's death could have been prevented if the university had stepped in sooner. According to the filing, Trinity failed to follow its own policies for investigating and responding to relationship violence and harassment. After an earlier dorm room incident, Mark was issued a criminal trespass warning that barred him from campus for 1 year. Even so, the lawsuit says he violated that restriction multiple times. As investigators continued looking into Kaylee's death, they uncovered numerous accounts of Mark's violent behavior throughout the relationship. One of Kaylee's sisters recalled Mark threatening to throw Kay off a balcony during an argument. Another said he threatened to shoot the brothers of one of Kay's ex-boyfriends. Based on those statements and other evidence, police obtained an arrest warrant for Mark Howarton. He later turned himself in. In February 2018, following the discovery of Kay's ransacked dorm room, Mark surrendered to authorities. He was charged with multiple offenses, including assault, intimate partner violence, and abduction. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. Mark's trial related to Kaylee's death began in December 2019. Prosecutors argued that Mark, known for his explosive temper, assaulted Kay during a fit of rage. They also claimed he drove around with her for nearly 6 hours before finally taking her to the hospital. The defense pushed back, arguing that Kaylee's death could have been caused by a combination of factors rather than a deliberate attack. The autopsy found banned substances in Kaylee's system, raising questions about whether a sudden spike in blood pressure or a head injury could have occurred during intimate activity. Still, the extent of her injuries stood out. Kaylee's mother later described the bruising as severe, so extreme that she compared it to injuries someone might suffer from a major fall. Jurors in Becker County were shown photographs of Kaylee's body, and the images were difficult to look at. The 19-year-old Trinity University sophomore was barely recognizable. Her body was covered in bruises, red marks, and scratches. Both eyelids were swollen and discolored. According to testimony, the only areas without visible injuries were her back and the backs of her legs. Dr. Susanna Dana, the forensic pathologist who performed Kaylee's autopsy, presented photos and diagrams to the jury. She testified that Kay had a subdural hematoma on the right side of her brain, a buildup of blood commonly associated with traumatic brain injury. Kaylee's father, Mark Mandadi, spoke in court about seeing photos of his daughter in the ICU. She was unresponsive, surrounded by tubes, her face barely visible. Fighting back tears, he told the court, "That's my daughter, my only child." Dr. Dana also testified that she found a noticeable indentation in Kay's skull. Much of her testimony focused on the severity of the injuries to Kaylee's head and face. She described trauma around the eyes, with both eyelids bruised and the left so swollen it could not fully close. There were extensive bruises along both sides of the jaw, inside the mouth, above the gums, and across the lips and cheeks. She also noted hemorrhaging in both eyes and showed close-up images of the inner eyelids to support her findings. Based on her examination, Dr. Dana concluded that Kay Mandy died from blunt force trauma to the head and face, likely caused by a heavy object. Not all experts agreed. Dr. William Anderson, who reviewed the autopsy results for the defense, challenged that conclusion. He testified that there were no fractures to the eye sockets, nose, or facial bones. In his view, the lack of fractures made a direct facial assault less likely. Instead, he suggested Kayle's injuries were more consistent with a fall, combined with the effects of extensive medical intervention. Defense attorney John Hunter echoed that argument, telling the jury that prosecutors had not provided a clear explanation of what happened to Kay that night. Without that clarity, he argued there was not enough evidence to definitively connect Mark Howarton to her death. Throughout the trial, defense attorney John Hunter repeatedly focused on Kay Mandadi's drug use. He brought up her past treatment for substance dependence and leaned heavily on toxicology findings. One expert witness, Jason Wallach, a professor at the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia, testified that Kay had a high level of MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy or Molly, in her system when Mark brought her to the hospital on the night of October 29, 2017. According to Wallach, the presence of MDMA could make even a relatively minor head injury far more dangerous. Hunter expanded on that point, explaining to the jury that MDMA affects people differently. He said it can raise body temperature, disrupt electrolytes, and in some cases, cause a person to lose consciousness. As the trial went on, jurors heard hours of testimony, including audio and video recordings of Mark Howarton speaking with police. In one recording, Mark admitted that he and Kay had argued earlier that night. He then claimed they had sex in the car before she lost consciousness. He described the encounter as rough and said he would sometimes choke her during sex, insisting it was something she wanted. Mark maintained that everything that happened between them was consensual. Still, many questions remained unanswered, especially about when Kayle's bruises appeared and how she suffered such severe injuries. Those questions were never fully resolved during the December 2019 trial. Kayle's mother, Allison, believed the evidence would lead to accountability for her daughter's death. Instead, the outcome left the family devastated. Mark continued to deny responsibility, and the defense argued that many of Kayle's injuries were caused by aggressive resuscitation efforts at the hospital. In the end, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. The case was heard in the 144th District Court under Judge Raymond Angelini, and when jurors remained deadlocked, a mistrial was declared. The case was dismissed, and Mark Howarton was effectively acquitted in that first trial, leaving Kayle's death unresolved. Bexar County District Attorney Joe Gonzalez, who had handled the case from the beginning, expressed disappointment with the outcome and said his office would review the evidence moving forward. For Kayle's parents, that wasn't enough. Allison and Lawrence began their own deep dive into the case. They collected police records, autopsy reports, and every piece of evidence they could get their hands on. One detail in particular stood out to them: a small, round pinpoint bruise near Kayle's ear. They believed Mark may have slammed Kayle's head against the car window, causing it to strike the door lock and leave the small, round bruise near her ear. To Kayle's family, that detail mattered. They hoped it could help explain how her injuries happened and point back to Mark. To better understand what might have occurred, Lawrence tracked down a Mercedes identical to the one Mark had been driving that night. He took photos inside the vehicle, positioning himself the way Kay might have been positioned, trying to see how the injury could have happened. With assistance from the Texas Rangers, the family obtained official records tied to the case, including 3 sworn affidavits that were used to secure Mark Howarton's arrest warrant. The charges listed included criminal acts, aggravated intimate assault, and criminal mischief. These documents filled in many of the gaps left by the first trial and laid out a detailed timeline of what happened before and after Kayle's death. Investigators also put together a slideshow that walked through key moments in chronological order. It traced the events leading up to Kaylee's death and highlighted the evidence gathered along the way. The timeline pointed to multiple instances where Mark allegedly lied to investigators, as well as the evidence that ultimately led to his arrest. During the trial, prosecutors described Mark as a controlling and manipulative boyfriend. They said he closely monitored Kaylee's movements, constantly called her, and sometimes took her phone to cut off contact with friends. Text messages shown to the jury revealed escalating behavior in the weeks before Kaylee's death. 2 weeks earlier, after Mark shoved Kay into a brick wall during an argument and trashed her dorm room, Kay told him she needed space. Instead of backing off, Mark sent her dozens of messages. At one point, he threatened to take his own life. Kay responded by begging him not to hurt himself. That same night, Mark called her nearly 200 times. At the Mal Luna Festival, tensions flared again when the couple argued about Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, who was also there. After the argument, prosecutors said Mark pulled Kay away from the event, put her into his car, and drove to a remote parking lot near the Whataburger corporate offices, close to US 281 and Sunset Road. GPS data and camera footage showed the car stayed in that parking lot for more than an hour. Prosecutors argued that it was during this time that Mark assaulted Kay, inflicting the injuries that would later take her life. Kaylee's family later expressed deep gratitude to the Texas Rangers for what they described as a thorough and committed investigation, one they believe led to the appropriate charges being filed. After years of delays caused by the CO-19 pandemic, Mark Howarton's retrial finally began in June 2023. During the retrial, prosecutors initially considered showing a video recorded by Kaylee's parents that documented her injuries in the hospital. Ultimately, they decided to withdraw it to avoid potential legal complications or disputes that could derail the case. With the evidence gathered alongside the Texas Rangers, the court found Mark Howarton guilty of aggravated assault causing bodily harm that led to Kaylee Mandadi's death. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, finding $10,000, and ordered to pay restitution to Kay's family. The court also prohibited him from contacting more than 20 individuals connected to the case. Now in his 30s, Mark is serving his sentence at Wallace County Jail and will be eligible for parole in 2033. While the conviction offered some measure of closure, Kaylee's family said the sentence still felt far too light for the loss they endured. In the second trial, Mark faced expanded charges, including aggravated assault causing serious bodily harm and criminally negligent homicide. In addition to the manslaughter charge from the first trial, the prosecution refined their approach to build a more complete case. But even with the verdict, both the family and prosecutors pushed for further legal action. Kaylee Mandadi's story highlights the tragic consequences of violence against a young person with so much potential. It also shows the relentless determination of her family to pursue justice. Her case received extensive media coverage, including the 48 Hours report, The Final Hours of Kaylee Mandadi, by correspondent Peter Vans. Beyond the courtroom, Kaylee's mother, Allison Steele, has worked to prevent other families from going through similar heartbreak. In 2019, she successfully advocated for expanding the missing person alert system in Texas. She later founded Kaylee's Calling, a nonprofit dedicated to unifying missing person alert systems to improve public safety and awareness. She also launched a campaign to raise awareness about the Clear Alert system, an emergency broadcast alert in Texas for missing adults aged 18 to 64. In 2021, Allison filed a civil lawsuit against Trinity University, accusing the institution of negligence. She argued that the university failed to inform her or other guardians about Mark Howarton's violent behavior, including the incident in which he trashed Kaylee's dorm room, and did not take adequate steps to prevent him from having continued access to her daughter. According to Steele, the university's inaction left Kay vulnerable to manipulation and harm. Kaylee's story is heartbreaking, but her family's advocacy continues to make an impact, turning tragedy into efforts that aim to protect others from similar fates. It's unclear whether the evidence gathered by Allison and Lawrence was formally presented during Mark Howarton's 2023 retrial. While he was acquitted of the charge of causing Kay's death, he was convicted of aggravated assault, resulting in bodily harm. Prosecutors noted that the family expressed some measure of relief after the verdict, having endured years of anguish. For Allison and Lawrence, the legal process was finally over, and they could begin the long, difficult path toward healing. The loss of a child is a pain that cannot be fully described, and Kaylee Mandadi's parents faced an especially heartbreaking journey. Allison Steele has shared that they remain deeply devastated by Kay's passing and ask that those with faith keep their family, friends, and their ongoing pursuit of justice in their thoughts and prayers. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in real investigations, shocking cases, and justice served, please subscribe, leave a comment, and join us as we explore more true crime stories. Case